My name is Laura, and I'm here with the Palestinian Youth Movement. A few days ago, the Zionist occupation forces withdrew from Al-Shifa Hospital, which has been targeted multiple times in the past 5 months of this genocide. From the hospital emerged horrific testimonies and images. Bodies had been mangled and disfigured beyond recognition, and the hospital itself has been rendered non-functioning. 6 months into this genocide, after more than 30,000 Palestinian civilians martyred, we are still witnessing the same war crimes to the highest degree. The situation has reached a new level of crisis and demands from us urgent mobilization and urgent action. While Canada has now engaged in 2 symbolic, non-binding motions, these war crimes of the highest degree continue to be enacted. In fact, Gaza is facing mass starvation and death by Israel. We are here to demand from the Canadian government real action that leads to material change on the ground and not mere lip service. We are here today to demand justice for Samar al-Khdour and her daughter. The al-Khdour family is one of many cases wherein Palestinian families have lost their loved ones because of the discriminatory measures of our government. Someone has been trying to bring her 13-year-old daughter Jenna through the IRCC for months. Samar's 13-year-old daughter Jenna, who had cerebral palsy, was killed, and Samar got the green light from the IRCC 2 weeks after her daughter has been killed. That is 2 weeks too late. There are many people in the community here in Montreal and across Canada who are desperately attempting to reach their families and get them to safety. We are here to demand justice from the Canadian government for not acting fast enough and demand that they act before many other families here are in the same situation. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm not here today to receive condolences, sympathy, or empathy for the loss of my 13-year-old daughter Jenna, because nothing on this planet that will bring comfort to my heart and soul or will compensate me after losing her. Jenna, who was severely disabled, got to experience multiple Israeli waged wars on Gaza even before this genocide had started. And Jenna, the first joy of my life and the apple of my eye, despite her disability, was longing to be held in my arms and receive the love and care that she deserves, as much as I wanted that for her. Yet Jenna and I were deprived of that for 7 years. I can't imagine how her small, weak body kept fighting to live until she took her last breath inside that dark and cold church in Gaza City, under the sound of bombs, jet fighters, and drones. She got to leave this ugly world, and I got to live for the rest of my life with the pain and the guilt of not hugging her for the last time and not kissing her goodbye for the last time. No one dares say to me, I understand your pain, Samar, because no one does and no one will. The IRCC intentional negligence and inaction, along with the former PM David Lamery's disregard to Jenna's case, killed my Jenna in a cold blood. Ignoring my repeated demands to bring Jenna to Canada before it's too late, even years, not only months before the genocide started. All that negligence and inaction has been covered under the title of normal processing times in Canada. Jenna is a victim of the IRCC's cruel, inhumane, and heartless system, and I'm sure that she's not the only one. I stand here today because I want answers from Miller's office, not only about my sister's file that's been stuck for 3 months now after the program for Gazans, was announced, but also to get answers about the stilled program impacting all Palestinian Canadians in this country. The Gaza visa program announced in December 2023 by Miller was described as a failure by Miller himself. So what is he doing about this? What is he doing to fix this failure? Not only that, Miller complains about Canada's inability to help Gazans leave the Gaza Strip because it's Israel that controls the movement at Rafah crossing. However, one of the program's discriminatory conditions is that the Palestinian families have to be in Gaza when applying under the program. Thus, as you can see, this program is nothing but a joke that aims at sedating the public opinion and leaving the Palestinians in Gaza to the Israeli slaughter machine. Trudeau, Miller, Mélanie Joly, and all politicians across the country, look carefully at Jana's face. I'm sure that you'll never forget about it. Not because you've ever cared, but because Jana's face and those of all Palestinian children will haunt you forever. That will remain a curse and a stain on Canada's alleged human rights, democracy, equality, etc. of these glittery words. We understand that you deal with us Palestinians on discriminatory and double standard basis because we're not white, we're not blue-eyed, but that will never give you the right to normalize and allow our slaughter. Jana and many others are not collateral damage to the Israeli operations in Gaza. They are rather the target of Israel's slaughter machine. You know that, but you still want to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear. You, Miller, were appointed in 2019 as the Minister of Indigenous Services. What a coincidence. I, Samar Al-Khdour, and everyone here, we all stand on a land stolen from its people. I stand here to defend and save another people from extinction and another land from being stolen from its people, my own people of Palestine. If your government regrets the genocide committed against the Indigenous people in Canada by marking the Truth and Reconciliation Day, then I request that this same government act promptly to stop a congruent horror from happening in Palestine. I'm standing here in your global north, coming from the global south, that you name them, where we have suffered from ugly colonialism and imperialism and greed for decades. So it's time for you, Trudeau, Miller, Mélanie, and all politicians to level up to your responsibilities and obligations. Therefore, I request from you that you not repeat the same mistake again by letting my sister and my other family members get killed in Gaza. I request you to expand and expedite the Gaza program. If you did it for Ukraine, then you can do it for Gaza. And don't tell me it's complicated. We're not talking about a relationship here. We're talking about a genocide. And finally, and most importantly, act promptly for a ceasefire, because this is the father and mother of all crimes that we're witnessing. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, my name is Nazar Sati. I'm an immigration, refugees, and citizenship and criminal lawyer. And the MYP told me to participate today and talk to media outlets about what's happening. I want to first preface by, giving a context of how Canada has dealt with crises in the past. One of the first things I learned when I was a law student many, many years ago within immigration is how the Canadian government treated Chinese immigrants over 100 years ago in a horrible, subhuman manner. And they only received an apology for this maybe a couple of years, not a couple, but about a decade ago in 2008. Following that, the Holocaust happened, and you had several Jewish people fleeing persecution from the Nazis in boats coming here in Canada. Instead of welcoming those Jewish people who were basically fleeing from Adolf Hitler, the Canadian government decided to turn their boat back, and presumably those Jews were annihilated. So that's the legacy that Canada holds. Contrary to what Canada would like to have the international community believe in its humanitarian reputation, this is what Canada is built upon. And after the horrors of the Holocaust, Canada signed the 1951 Convention on Refugees and is supposed to enact it. And yet we've seen conflict after conflict. Canada has failed. But then you saw a sharp contrast with the way the Ukraine war was handled. Ukrainians were given measures that I and no other immigration lawyer has ever seen before. They were given an expedited process. Some of them, from what I understood, had their tickets paid for, had their fees waived. Some of them had tuition at the same level as Canadian citizens. The list goes on and on and on. Employers getting subsidies to hire them. They were treated in a manner very befitting of how a refugee should be treated. And yet you haven't seen that experience mirrored with other refugees, and you have to ask yourself why. I can only honestly think of an implicit bias and structural racism within the Canadian immigration system. There is no other explanation. There is no other explanation for what happened. And when one would watch news coverage at the time, they would say, well, Ukraine isn't like Iraq and Syria. They're like us. And that's the reason why those people were welcomed with open arms and with every single resource that the Canadian government could pool for them. All we're asking is that the same courtesy be extended onto the Palestinian people and onto other refugees fleeing from conflict zones. So this is one point that is very important today that we understand, is that Canada is doing absolutely nothing. This isn't even a half measure. There is a cap of 1,000 people from Gaza. That's it. If we look at the conflict so far in Ukraine, since about February 2022, about 13,000 or so civilians have perished. Contrast that with Gaza, in which until now you've got about more than 33,000 to 34,000 dead, of which 13,000 and more are children and 90,000 plus are women, innocent civilians. And yet the Canadian government thinks it's completely fine to come with this outrageous public policy that caps applicants at 1,000 and does steps to make the process very, very difficult on families. So what we're requesting is that it's a threefold measure, really. First thing is that the cap be removed. There was no, for Ukrainian refugees, there was no cap, and as far as I know, about 900,000 of them were admitted. Why are we putting a cap on Gazans? There should be no cap. That's number one. Number two, we need to expedite the processes. It is unacceptable that these people are languishing and dying, malnutrition, lack of medical care, being bombarded, and the Canadian government thinks it's fine to just put red tape upon red tape upon red tape and make them wait. The third thing we're requesting is the removal of the discriminatory policies within the application process. So at the end of the press conference, I'll be happy to share with the media outlets who are with us today some examples of application forms. But essentially, these application forms tell people to disclose a plethora of personal information that I have never seen in any other application before. They ask for pictures of scars. They ask what people were doing since they were 16. Typically, you ask since the age of 18. They're asking what they were doing since the age of 16, their scars. They want all their social media information. Currently, there is this measure where they ask applicants for a plethora of information. And I was talking about social media accounts. So social media accounts, all their WhatsApp information, every single application they've ever used. And to add insult on top of injury, what they say is that this information may and will probably be shared with Israeli and Egyptian intelligence. And within the forms it says that, you know, Canada is, by signing this form, you are basically releasing Canada of any responsibility with regards to that, which is completely unacceptable. I honestly think that this could be very well considered a charter violation in terms of putting these people's lives at risk and security. You are basically the Canadian government is volunteering very sensitive personal information to foreign intelligence agencies. How is that in any way something feasible? I have never seen any such measure enacted in the past. Again, I would like to contrast it with Ukraine. Another thing that we're asking, that the government is asking from Palestinians, is that they have an anchor, which means a relative here that is ready to support them. That relative needs to go and fill out a form and have it signed in front of a commissioner for oaths and all these complicated maneuvers. Whereas with the Ukrainians, they didn't even need to have family in Canada, they could just come in. So again, why this double standard? So we're also asking for this requirement of having an anchor in Canada, and you know that anchor has to be very close family, to also be removed. Canada absolutely needs to respond to this horrible humanitarian disaster in a manner befitting of Canada's reputation on the international stage and of its humanitarian and international obligations. This is an absolute disgrace in front of the international community. The last thing I would like to speak about, and certainly not the least, is the case of Samar's daughter Jana. Jana is, like many applicants, a protected person, which means that she came to Canada and she asked for asylum. Her case was heard in front of an immigration judge here, and that judge determined that she was indeed a person in need of protection. And so all she needed to do was basically apply for the rest of her family to come here through a permanent residence application. Her daughter had cerebral palsy. There was no reason for the Canadian government to have postponed and delayed the application for so long. And yet her case is not the only one. There are many more out there, not just Gazans, not just Palestinians, from every country you can imagine. People are waiting and waiting and waiting, and they are given the same template response over and over again. We are processing your application, these are the wait times. That is not a justifiable reason. These people, when they are fleeing war and they leave their families behind, their families can be subject to persecution by the same authorities they're fleeing. We're talking about rape, we're talking about torture, we're talking about murder. These are reprisals that they can be inflicted upon them. And so the Canadian government's very nonchalant, you know, way of doing things as well. You know, that's the standard time. And I could maybe understand it for adults, because Canada has a system where you have to pass a medical check, a criminality check, and a security check. But tell me, what security risk did Jana, a child with cerebral palsy, pose upon the Canadian public? I can only characterize what happened as a glaring, horrific failure on the part of the Canadian immigration system. One that never needs to be repeated again. And this mother, she's not doing it for her. Her daughter's gone. She's not coming back. She's doing it for the rest of everyone here. There needs to be an awakening as far as how these applications are processed. The status quo cannot continue. There was an option that she did not know about and that they didn't tell her about. It's called, you apply for a TRP, which it's a measure that's supposed to, when you're waiting for your permanent residence application to be processed, you can bring the family member here quickly while waiting, since the Canadian government likes to always, put red tape upon red tape. And yet, the feedback that I've gotten from my colleagues across the country is that these applications are overwhelmingly refused. So even when people, whether they are Gazan or not, apply for these TRPs, they are still denied. So what exactly is the Immigration Ministry doing? We demand, as of now, that the special measures for Gaza be completely overhauled, updated, facilitated. The system as it is currently is designed by its own nature to discourage applicants from actually going forward with it. There are a million roadblocks along the way for these disgruntled families. I could give you my personal feedback with Afghan refugees. Afghan refugees, a lot of whom helped the Canadian Armed Forces, helped the Canadian government, received very little in terms of support. I have a family that contacted me recently telling me how they didn't get any news from the Canadian government, and they basically gave up, and they didn't have access to internet. And so when they were logging in and they were checking just their emails, they saw that they had a message from the Canadian government. You're approved. Oh, okay, except that they passed the deadline. They write to the Canadian government, hey, can you please, let us in anyway? Unfortunately, your deadline has passed. You must apply again. This is our government's. This is our government's response, and it didn't start with Mark Miller. It didn't start with Mendicino. It didn't start with Sean Fraser. It didn't start with Ahmed Hussein. It's been like this for decades. This is our system. We need to change it. There needs to be a major overhaul of the entire immigration system in Canada, and it starts by making these measures, these facilitated measures. Let's do the right thing for once, and let's treat every single refugee with the same respect and the same courtesy and the same humanity that we extended upon the Ukrainians. What we did for the Ukrainians was a tremendous and beautiful thing. We're only asking that it be repeated. And if the Canadian government ever tells you that, we don't have the resources, it's difficult for us, that's not true. They did it for the Ukrainians. They can pool their resources for others. And I'd like to, end on this note. If ever the government will say, well, we're trying our best, which we all know is they're not even doing the bare minimum. It's not even lip service. It's nothing, honestly. But even if the government were doing more, the government will always say, well, we're sort of, bound by the decisions of Egypt and Israel. We have a Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have an excellent relationship with both Israel and Egypt. We have diplomats. That is what a diplomat is for. You can negotiate a safe passage into Rafah. You can negotiate a secure humanitarian corridor, but you do not let the status quo continue. Thank you very much. Beyond the words that were just said today, I want you to look at the faces that were failed by the Canadian government. Habiba Zakout, 3. Ahmed Tubail, 12. Hassan Atwa. Muhannad Shaheen, 23. Mohammed Ajur, 31. Imad Hamdan, 38. Ammar Al-Baltaniji, 10. Mohammed Al-Nawari, 23. Omar Ziara, 34. Haneen Jarada, 31. Nafiz Hamdan, 58, and his son, Mohammed, 19. Mohammed Al-Baltaniji, 5. Abdullah Jarada, 12. Jana, Samar's daughter, 13. A child with cerebral palsy, no risk to Canadian society. Mahmoud Tubail, 20. Nasser Jarada, 7. Again, so these are examples. These are examples. These are the faces of our failures. These are people who waited for their application to be processed and died waiting.
Hi everyone, thanks. My name is Avi. I'm from the Montreal chapter of Independent Jewish Voices. IJV is a grassroots Jewish organization committed to combating racism and colonialism here on Turtle Island and in Palestine. We oppose Zionism, an ideology that claims to speak in our name but actually desecrates Jewish principles, ethics, histories, and our diverse cultures. As such, we've been supporting the BDS call for the last 15 years. We will continue to do so until there's an end to colonial occupation and apartheid, and the right of return for Palestinians is upheld. Today, and going forward, we want to show our solidarity to Samar, who's made her grief and resistance part of a public campaign for justice. We want to honor the memory and life of her daughter, Jenna, who died at the start of this year as a result of the Israeli occupation. Amongst all of these people who represent an entire world, an entire universe that was destroyed by the Israeli occupying forces and the siege. Jenna, like others, died as a result, as has been said today, of a racist, ableist, and inhumane border policy of the Canadian government, as well as the diplomatic cover, arms, technology that has been provided to Israel since the beginning of the genocide. Those of us who've been working in migrant justice over the years know that people who Canada refuses at the border are also people who have been displaced by Canadian policies, namely mining companies over the years, and here we also see with the support for Israeli apartheid. So what do we have to say to Minister Miller today? I won't speak for too long, so much has already been said. I will speak as a lawyer, a friend spoke about history in Canada as a descendant of Jews who fled to Turtle Island to escape ethnic cleansing. There's a painful historical rhyme here unfolding. My family came to Turtle Island at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century when Canada needed migrants for cheap, exploited, dangerous labor, and Jews from Eastern Europe were welcomed for that. However, when the economic system changed in the 1930s, the border was closed to refugees fleeing, in this case, the Nazi genocide, before it was previous forms of repression from other forces. So between 1933 and 1945, Canada accepted less than 5,000 Jewish refugees. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, the least among all Western industrial countries, less than Bolivia, Argentina, etc. The policy came to be known as "none is too many," a quote from a high-ranking immigration official who was asked what the right number of Jewish refugees were to be let into Canada, and he answered, "None is too many." In classic Canadian style, though, the government did not have a law that exclusively barred Jewish refugees, but instead created insurmountable bureaucratic barriers and political considerations, including using the Red Scare that Jewish migrants would bring socialism, communism, etc. So here's where we see lots of rhyming today, with a government that dragged its feet to implement these so-called special measures to facilitate safety for Palestinians. 3 months too late for Jana. Canada has blood on its hands. Shame. We should be clear, this is anti-Palestinian racism, couched in bureaucratic doublespeak. Shame. We have a minister, this is our none is too many moment right now, who speaks about, this is Mark Miller's quote, managing a flow of a number that we are uncertain about. Human creations of God here are not numbers to be managed. We have an application process that egregiously exceeds normal standards, as has been described today, looking at social media accounts, employment back to age 16, ableist policies of looking at scars and injuries during a genocide. Yay! Biometric data is asked for, etc. And looking at this social media and political orientation, again, this is a form of anti-Palestinian racist dehumanization and discrimination. Minister Miller needs to work to undo these discriminatory measures now. We need to end this arbitrary 1,000 person cap now. Families should be reunited safely now. We'll continue working together in solidarity. We'll continue working for a permanent ceasefire, an end to occupation and apartheid, and the right to leave, the right to stay, and the right to return. Long live Palestine. Thank you.
As we know, Miller called in sick today, coincidentally, so I want you to join me as we chant. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes. Miller, Miller, you aren't slick.
Miller, Miller, you aren't slick.
Our families die while you're out sick.
Our families die while you're out sick.
Miller, Miller, you aren't slick.
Miller, Miller, you aren't slick.
Our families die while you're out sick.
Our families die while you're out sick.
Miller, Miller, take your sick day.
Miller, Miller, take your sick day.
How many visas delayed today?
How many visas delayed today?
Miller, Miller, take your sick day.
Miller, Miller, take your sick day.
How many families kept apart today?
How many families kept apart today?
Miller, Miller, take